Hello there and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches, the program that takes you around the world in 25 minutes. I'm Joke Rogers. On the program this week, Israel and Iran trade fresh strikes as displacement rises in Lebanon. Plus, Ukraine says Russia has launched its biggest drone attack of the war, firing 948 drones in just 24 hours. Air raid sirens continued sounding across Israel this week after Iran fired another wave of missiles, with strikes reported in Tel Aviv and injuries confirmed by Israeli authorities. As the war grinds on, world leaders are warning of widening regional and global fallouts, from disrupted air travel to growing pressure on energy supplies and shipping routes.
Day and night, Israelis have been rushing to shelters as missiles and interceptions light up the sky. On Tuesday, Iranian strikes hit parts of Tel Aviv, damaging residential buildings and sending residents outside with whatever they could carry. As the fighting drags on, some Israelis say they fear a long conflict with no clear end.
And I'm very worried about the war and where Israel is going to, whether the war or what's happening in the government. So I'm coming and to protest and to show that we do care. And not everyone is with the government, not everyone is for the war. Some people are against.
As both sides trade strikes, Iran has accused the U.S. and Israel of damaging public health and healthcare infrastructure, saying the conflict is taking a growing toll on civilians and medical workers.
Unfortunately, the recent attack has had multiple consequences for both community health and functioning of the health network. One of the most significant effects is the rise in social stress caused by feeling of insecurity, threat of life, destruction of infrastructure, and the lost family member or loved ones. Repeated exposure to violence, forced displacement, and the disrupt of social support system can increase the risk of mental health disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, anxiety, and depression.
The U.S. and Israel have denied targeting civilians during the Iran war.
The European Union expand its existing maritime security.
Meanwhile, concern is growing over shipping and energy supplies, with the Strait of Hormuz at the center of the pressure.
I'm deeply concerned about the conflict. Iran has to cease immediately its threats, laying of mines, drones and missile attacks, and other attempts to block the strait to commercial shipping. The recent attacks by Iran on unarmed commercial vessels in the Gulf, attacks on civilian infrastructure, including oil and gas installations, and the de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz by Iranian forces is unacceptable and must be condemned. I also want to emphasize that freedom of navigation is a fundamental principle of international law. We will come back to these issues and their structural consequences at the Parliament this afternoon.
We've continued to condemn the Iranian regime for the actions it's taken in the Strait of Hormuz. This is having an impact on the global economy, and the targeting of civilian ships is against the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which allows for freedom of navigation, is very important. What Australia has provided.
From the Gulf, the UAE has also condemned any attempt to disrupt the strait.
Let me be absolutely clear. Weaponizing the Strait of Hormuz is not an act of aggression against one nation. It is economic terrorism against every nation. And no country should be allowed to hold Hormuz hostage.
UN Human Rights Commissioner Volker Turk warns the civilian toll is rising and that attacks on infrastructure essential to civilians may amount to war crimes.
To pull the region back from the brink and prevent the further loss of civilian life and destruction of vital public infrastructure, renewed diplomatic efforts are critical and urgently needed. Attacks targeting civilian objects or infrastructure indispensable to the civilian population constitute serious violations of international humanitarian law and amount to war crimes.
The US and Israel launched strikes on Iran on February 28. Tehran responded with strikes on Israel and US assets in the region. According to the most recent figures, the Iranian side has reported over 1,400 dead, with 13 deaths of military personnel admitted by the US side.
In eastern Lebanon, residents are calling for action after fresh Israeli airstrikes destroyed homes and left families searching through rubble for loved ones. With displacements rising nationwide, aid groups and health teams say shelters are filling up fast, while basic services come under increasing strain.
Homes reduced to piles of concrete and twisted metal. In Baalbek, residents pick through the wreckage after renewed Israeli airstrikes in the area, with families gathering at the government hospital waiting for word on relatives.
We remain on constant alert, receiving all types of cases. Right now, we have no wounded patients, though we have treated many and performed surgeries.
Residents say the damage is compounding fear and frustration, and they are urging Lebanon's leaders to act.
All the wounded are our kin. In Baalbek, we are all one family. What we need is not material support, but a political decision for our leaders to stand with their people, because we will remain steadfast and we will not be defeated.
With the fighting intensifying, displacement has spread far beyond the south. In Beirut's Hamra district, the Pacific Hotel, once closed for years, aid organizations say the scale of need is rising quickly, especially for children, people with disabilities, and those with chronic health conditions. Health teams have been trying to bring basic care directly into shelters.
Okay, this is an old hotel. It's owned by our family. It's owned by a direct cousin of mine. And we thought about opening this hotel for refugees, which the situation was very catastrophic on the streets. And now we have like 196 families and more than 450 refugees in this hotel.
The UN and health agencies warn the displacement is also driving up health risks in overcrowded shelters, with services disrupted and medical supplies stretched.
Up to 3.2 million people have been displaced in Iran and over 1 million in Lebanon. Many are living in overcrowded shelters, which have the potential to rapidly increase health risks. And in Syria, more than 100,000 people have recently arrived from Lebanon.
The 2024 Israel-Hezbollah war ended with a ceasefire. But tensions have flared again after Israel launched a new operation this month, following Hezbollah's entry into the wider US-Israeli conflict with Iran. Lebanon's health ministry says more than 1,000 people have been killed and thousands wounded since the latest escalation began.
And away from the Middle East, Ukraine says Russia has carried out its biggest aerial bombardment of the war, launching a record number of drones and missiles over a 24-hour period. The escalation comes as diplomatic efforts remain stalled, and the United Nations warns the violence is worsening, with civilians again paying the price through sustained attacks on energy and other vital infrastructure.
Explosions in the night and then again in daylight. Ukraine's Air Force says Russia launched 948 drones over a 24-hour period, including 556 fired from 0900 on Tuesday in an unusually large daytime barrage, followed by an overnight wave of 392 drones and 34 missiles. Authorities say at least 3 people were killed in the daytime attacks, with dozens injured. In his nightly address, President Volodymyr Zelensky said the scale of the latest strike shows Russia has no intention of ending the war. While Western Ukraine has been hit less often than areas closer to the front line, the latest attacks underline how far the conflict is reaching. Russia also reported strikes on its own territory. The governor of the Kursk region said 1 person was killed and 13 injured in a Ukrainian drone attack on an agricultural enterprise. At the United Nations, officials warned the trajectory is worsening, with civilians still bearing the brunt.
Over the winter, damage to Ukraine's energy infrastructure brought the country's energy grid to the brink of total collapse. According to Ukrainian authorities, 60% of gas production capacity has been destroyed, and all the country's power stations damaged, leading to persistent disruptions in electricity, heating, and water across the country. The Russian Federation has also reported attacks impacting civilians and civilian infrastructure. Over the weekend of 14 to 16 March, local authorities in the Russian Federation reported the largest Ukrainian drone attack targeting Moscow to date.
Strikes on energy and other vital infrastructure are cutting civilians off from the basics of survival: electricity, water, heat. Tens of thousands of families across the country are left in the dark and cold for weeks on end. These attacks reflect a sustained pattern of damage to the systems on which civilians depend to survive, with humanity increasingly stepping in to fill the gaps left by the deterioration of essential services.
The United States says it is trying to convince both sides they have more to gain by ending the war than by prolonging it.
From the day he returned to office last year, President Trump has made it clear that he's determined to end the war in Ukraine. That war never would have happened if he'd been president, and it's imperative to end the senseless death and destruction. And the war obviously doesn't just affect the belligerents. It has thrown the entire international political, economic, and military order out of whack. What we're trying to do is to show both sides that they have more to gain from ending the war than from continuing to fight. Peace would unlock prosperity like this region has never seen before. It's unfortunate that the UN has failed to play the constructive role in seeking peace that President Trump has been playing.
However, US-backed talks have stalled since the outbreak of the US-Israel war with Iran in late February, further complicating the diplomatic push.
Объективно требующий пристального внимания международного сообщества.
Zelensky is flabbergasted that the spotlight has shifted from Ukraine to the Middle East. Instead of focusing on his own people, he's trying to prove his usefulness to Western sponsors, worried the money will move elsewhere. Clearly, Kyiv prefers being drawn into any war rather than pursuing peace at home.
There is, moreover, enough evidence that Russia is now transferring modernized Shahed-type drones to Iran, drawing on its own production capabilities based on licensed Iranian designs. The same Shahed drones that Tehran was sending to Moscow since the beginning of the war, 2022, to murder Ukrainian civilians are now produced in Russia and sent back both to destroy oil and gas infrastructure as the backbone of the economy in the Gulf state and to kill American soldiers.
Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, and the war continues with near-daily attacks across the country. As air defenses intercept fresh waves of drones and both sides trade accusations, UN officials warn the danger is not only further escalation, but a war the world begins to accept as routine.
When And Foreign Dispatches returns in just a moment. We head to China to see the world's longest outdoor escalator system. Stay with us. At least 64 people, including 13 children, have been reported killed in an alleged drone strike on a hospital in El Dain in Sudan's East Darfur state. The World Health Organization says dozens more were wounded, with parts of the facility left out of action. No side has claimed responsibility, but a Sudanese rights group has accused the army, a charge the military denies.
Inside El Dain Teaching Hospital, operating theaters and wards are torn apart, with medical equipment smashed beneath twisted concrete and metal. Staff say the strike hit on the first day of Eid, just after people had broken their fast, when the hospital was crowded with patients, many of them women and children.
On the first day of Eid, there were a lot of patients here. The drone struck at about 8:48. It was a very difficult situation all at once. I mean, these upstairs wards had 180 patients, and the downstairs wards had 120. Even my colleague's condition is critical. God help him. In Awavizi, Alan Charles Kuntiv.
During the strike, I was working in the obstetrics and gynecology operating room. We were just working when we were surprised by the ground shaking and the ceiling falling on the patients.
The World Health Organization confirmed 64 people were killed, including 13 children with up to 89 wounded. Sudanese rights group Emergency Lawyers said the hospital was struck by an army drone, but no party has officially taken responsibility. Sudan's military has denied carrying out the attack. The UN says the incident is part of a wider pattern, with drones increasingly used in populated areas across Sudan.
We have not identified who committed this attack, but as I said, both parties to the conflict use extensively the drones. We have identified the different areas and who controls those areas. But no, our call is for both parties to stop immediately using this type of weaponry. A sharp increase in the use of drones to conduct airstrikes this year in Sudan underlines the devastating impact of high-tech and relatively cheap weapons in populated areas. According to information received, over 500 civilians were killed in such strikes from the 1st of January to the 15th March.
The UN Secretary General has condemned the strike and renewed calls for an immediate de-escalation.
He calls on the parties to immediately de-escalate the fighting and agree to a cessation of hostilities. Mr. Guterres renews his appeal to the parties to work with mediators, including Pekka Haavisto, his personal envoy, to return to the negotiating table to pursue a lasting ceasefire with a comprehensive, inclusive, and Sudanese-owned political process. We stand ready to support any genuine steps to end the fighting in Sudan.
The attack comes amid Sudan's war between the army and the Rapid Support Forces, a conflict that has killed tens of thousands, displaced millions, and left the country facing what the UN describes as the world's worst hunger and displacement crisis. There is no end in sight to bring a stop to the fighting, now considered one of the deadliest conflicts in Africa for civilians, despite US-led peace efforts.
In South Sudan's western Equatoria, thousands of families displaced by fighting are now sheltering in a church compound in Mundri, trying to survive with little protection from the rain and few services. The United Nations is warning that fresh violence and serious rights abuses are driving new waves of displacement, threatening to push the world's youngest nation.
In the quiet grounds of a church in Mundri, makeshift shelters of sticks and tarpaulin stretch wall to wall. More than 4,000 people are living here after fleeing confrontations in Greater Mundri late last year, running from villages that emptied almost overnight. When the rains come, many of the shelters collapse. Families rebuild, then rebuild again. Among them is 38-year-old Ada Stephen, a mother of 8, trying to keep her children fed while working odd jobs for host communities.
We are just here. We don't know whether peace will come or not. We just pray to God. There's nothing else to do.
Peacekeepers from the UN mission in South Sudan have visited the site, meeting displaced families and local leaders, and pressing for dialogue to reduce tensions and make return possible.
We identified quite a number of protection concerns. We are also trying to engage with the authorities in the Mundu East, especially the county commissioner, to see if they can be able to start initiating a peace dialogue and improve the environment that will support returns.
As local communities struggle to cope, the UN Human Rights Office says the situation nationally is deteriorating, with reports of killings, destruction of civilian infrastructure, and mass displacement.
There must be prompt, impartial, thorough, and effective investigations into these and all other allegations of violations of the laws of war and of international human rights law, which are taking place. And those found responsible must be fully, all those found responsible must be fully held to account, including those bearing superior and command responsibility. We call for a ceasefire to be agreed as promptly as possible to save lives and to turn this conflict in the direction of a negotiated solution. Parties to the conflict must also desist from attacking civilians and civilian objects and ensure safe and sustained flow of humanitarian aid to all in need, consistent with their obligations under international law.
The warnings come as fighting in parts of Jonglei and other regions has sent more people fleeing, deepening an already severe humanitarian crisis in a country where conflict and displacement have become cyclical.
South Sudan remains one of the most displacement-affected countries in the world. Nearly 10 million people require humanitarian assistance, and more than 2.3 million people are displaced within the country. Over the past 2 months alone, over 250,000 people have been displaced, and yet this has hardly been registered on the international scene.
And finally, on the program, in China, a new vertical highway is changing daily life in Wushan County. A vast outdoor escalator system now links neighborhoods separated by steep slopes and winding roads, cutting what used to be an hour-long climb to about 20 minutes and drawing tourists eager to see what's being described as the world's longest escalator.
For years, people in Wushan's Gotong area had a simple problem. Getting anywhere meant battling steep hills and narrow, twisting roads. Work, school, hospital visits, even a quick grocery run could take close to an hour on foot. Now the journey is being reshaped by the Wushan Goddess Escalator, a 905-meter network of escalators, lifts, and walkways built into the mountainside. Launched during Lunar New Year celebrations, the project turns a punishing climb into a ride of around 20 minutes, offering a safer option for residents and easier access for visitors.
For commuting, it now only takes 20 minutes to get to work. Everyone chooses to take the escalator now, whereas before we had to walk. Now, the elderly and out-of-town tourists all come here. There are so many of them.
Tourists from all over come to check it out. I also see many foreigners coming here, and they all say they are very pleasantly surprised and amazed.
The system runs along Goddess Avenue, climbing 242 meters. It comprises 21 escalators, 8 elevators, 4 moving walkways, and several pedestrian bridges, with glass panels preserving panoramic views of the surrounding gorges. Chongqing is already known as China's mountain city, famous for transport solutions built around extreme elevation changes. But Wushan's new system is now being promoted as the longest outdoor urban escalator of its kind and a major addition to the region's growing network of three-dimensional mobility. For locals, though, the transformation is simpler. Fewer dangerous climbs, faster access to essential services, and a daily route that no longer feels like an obstacle course.
And that's the program today. Remember, you can catch all our top stories and more on channelstv.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Joka Rogers. Bye for now.